For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord. Now, all that being said, look at verse 11. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Now, there's a lot being said here. But again, this goes back to where it obviously, I think in a lot of ways, this is where a lot of churches have either taken their stand or accepted this or not. And I believe as a broad stripe of churches today, and I'm talking about what we would consider, what people call evangelical, we'll just say Bible-believing churches. There's this idea that, we have people come in, we kind of accept them for what they are, and you got to be very careful of that. The idea, well, God will take you just like you are. He'll accept you to his person, but he's the one who changes us. So it's a very false statement when people walk through the doors and say, well, I'm not changing anything. I just want to be loved and cared for. We're going to love you, but I'm going to tell you something. Churches change when we don't follow what's being said right here. We're not to have fellowship with people that live in darkness. Now, to be quite honest with you, I remember I used to sit down with people when I would go and candidate for a church, and boy, they'd pull out and ask some very hard questions, which I was fine with. The Bible don't scare me. But I'm going to tell you, a lot of them had a lot of questions about church discipline. Well, what about this happens? What are you going to do about it? So evidently, they must have had a lot of problems and want to know how I would police that. And, of course, they're trying to do it biblically. But I'll say this. When you look at the language here, this is one of the reasons why when we have a membership, we got to make sure they're saved, okay? We got to make sure they've had that divine change. And if they can at least follow the obedience of baptism, then let me tell you something. This is where churches get in a whole heap of trouble. They create a supposed fellowship based on the idea, oh, we care about everybody. Yeah, but if you've got lifestyles that's not right, God says very plainly in verse 11, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. I think it takes a very strong person to be able to carry that out, someone that's obviously going to be spiritual and is going to be close to God. Is there any wonder that what's found in verse 11, if you notice what's said in verse number 18, and be not drunk with wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit, and talking about being filled with the Spirit. So I think a Spirit-filled Christian is someone that needs to understand what does it mean to have no fellowship? What does it mean to be able to do that and do that in Christian love and know why you're doing it, rather than it seem like, well, you're pushing people away and you're not like us. There's a difference. There's a difference. And I think it's very interesting here, the phrase, the unfruitful works of darkness. Okay? If you take that phrase, Christians are to be fruitful. The Bible speaks about the fruit of the Spirit, so that means if in our own lives or we accept and have in a strong fellowship pattern of people that follow these things that were said here, then I'll promise you that makes us unfruitful for God, which is why some people are unfruitful. There's too much fellowship with darkness and not enough fellowship with the light.